with Andy Paterna at MCC. Andy, when did you begin working at MCC?
All right, I started working in June of 1972, Director of Student Activities. I actually lived in Amston Lake, and I remember this because the person who was leaving, some of the folks who remember his name, Jack Lafort, who was Director of Student Activities. We actually rented his house. He went out to Arizona, and Joan and I were living in North Jersey. We lived in New York for a little while, but we were in the middle of the city. I went to graduate school at NYU, and so we get here, we moved to Amston Lake, and it's maybe 20 miles away from here, but we thought, great, New England setting, we're going to be on this little lake, and it's the whole thing about New England, the dream about New England. 6 months later, we had to move to Manchester to get near some people because it was just too isolated out there. So that was our first culture shock, moving to Connecticut compared to New York City.
Now, do you remember who interviewed you when you got the job?
I remember the only person who interviewed me was Jack Gannon. And after he interviewed a couple of people, I understand, and after he called me back a second time, then I met Harry Godey, who was then Dean of Students. And then a few days later, they offered me the job. Jack had some doubts about me because at that time, my hair was about shoulder length, and I came to the interview in leather sandals. So he wasn't quite sure, but he took his chance anyway.
Jack actually told that same story.
He did, really? Oh, God.
So what were some of your responsibilities when you started working here?
Well, as Director of Student Activities, at that time we had, although it was a small building, all those temporary buildings on East Campus, we had a physical student center. So the bookstore was in there, the cafeteria, culinary arts, student government offices, and my office. And so I worked as advisor to the Student Senate, sponsoring programs, helping with student government issues, as well as managing the building. So I was kind of the director of the Student Center as well, taking care of the building itself.
So you must have been working when the fire hit.
Yes, 1979. It was a Friday night, and I get a call from the president saying, there's been a fire, you should get down here. And by the time I got down here, it was completely level, right to the ground. So we lost everything. We had a lot of good archives of programs and events that we had done that we were keeping files of, but we lost everything. So that was 79. And a year later, we had a new building. Unfortunately, it was the same temporary building, but it was a new building at least.
Who were some of the people that you worked with during that period, say in the 70s?
Well, Jack Gannon, as my direct supervisor, was terrific to work with and work for, and then Pat Mistred in the athletics department. They were also in that building, so student activities and athletics kind of shared the same space. Mike Hayes at the time was culinary arts, so Mike, we had a small dining room in that building, so they were serving meals in the building, so we'd often go to lunch, Pat, and see Mike, and I would go to lunch there and support the student culinary arts program.
And you worked during the latter part of Fred Lowe's presidency, didn't you?
Right.
Do you remember him at all?
The last year, I do remember him. He was such an interesting guy, and he had this attitude that if we wanted to try something, we should go for it. I mean, he wanted the college to grow, and he didn't see necessarily one direction it should grow in, but he just saw whatever expansion we could come up with, we should do that, because he was interested in making sure we were serving the community in every way we could. He was a terrific guy. I'll tell you one funny story about him. At my first orientation, new student orientation, Fred Lowe gets up and he talks about how we work with an open door policy, and so if students want to come and see, my door is always open, he said. So about 2 or 3 speakers later, I'm wrapping up the program. I said, don't forget, you can come and see me because my door is really always open. And I didn't quite mean it that way, but he gave me a look as I said those words, and I think I should see you later. I thought, okay, great, 2 weeks on the job, I'm going to lose it. But he was very nice about it, and I didn't mean it that his door wasn't open, because actually you could walk down the hall. It was true, you could stop in his office any time.
Now, do you have recollections of the student body some of the students during that period?
Yeah, in the early 70s, there were two different groups. I think there was a younger student population, definitely. We probably had a very high young population transferring to four-year schools. And then at that time, the mid to late 70s, we had a huge influx of Vietnam veterans attending. So you had an older group of students as well. So it was an interesting mix. And working with the student government, I worked with all those groups within the student government. In fact, Tom Sheridan, who was a Vietnam veteran, part of the student government, president or vice president of the Student Senate.
Very good. Now, you must have also obviously been around in the '84 when the Low Building was created. Did
Yes.
you move up to the Low Building?
Well, I did, but only because in 1980 I then applied for and received the position of Director of Admissions. So the admissions office was moving up. So that's how I got to move to the Low Building. So in a sense, I've been here a long time, but this is my third job within the college. So first Director of Student Activities, then Director of Admissions, and then Coordinator of the Sport and Exercise Studies program. So in 1984, we moved up into the Low Building, which we thought was the best ever. I mean, the whole system was jealous of us. We had a building, and now you look back at it and see how lacking that building was compared to what we have today. But at that time, compared to temporary buildings, it was great.
Let me just go back a little bit.
Yeah.
You came from NYU,
Right.
and I'm guessing that the campus you arrived at in the early '70s wasn't quite on that level.
No.
What was your impression when the first time you drove up and saw the setup?
I drove up, I thought, first of all, let me give you the scene of NYU. We're at Washington Square Park. I'm working in a student center there that's 10 stories high, has its own auditorium and program center attached to it for concerts and lectures. And I drive onto the campus here, and I thought it was a trailer park. I said, no, I must have gotten the wrong address. This couldn't possibly be and I like to tell the story that the day I came for the interview, and Jack took me around the campus, and that night I went home, and I said to Joan, I said, it's really weird. I've just come from a place that doesn't look even like a college compared to NYU, but all those people are happy there. They really enjoy what they're doing. So it was the people here who really attracted me. And sure enough, when I got here, I found out that our reputation as one of the leaders in the state in the community college education scene had to do with the faculty and staff and the leadership here, and not just what the physical buildings look like. Because we had pretty bad, I thought it was a pretty bad situation, yet it was a great place to work.
Now, when did you move from Director of Admissions into the faculty side?
That was 1992. Pat Mistretta actually was interested in putting together an exercise science program for students, and he asked me to work with him on developing a curriculum. So we did that. In the meantime, I started to go back to school for another degree, and by 92, we started about 89. By 92, it had been approved, and a position was available, and I applied for the position to head up the program.
Okay, so your career really has had a number of different recreations, so to speak.
Right.
Tell me, look back over the last nearly 40 years. Tell me some of the things you're most proud of.
Well, I go back to the student activities program, the first one, and I worked with a great group of people, not just the students who were involved, but there was a group of faculty and staff who made up the Cultural Programs Committee at the time. And the things that we did, it was amazing to me that a small college like this could do all the things we did with the number of, I think, pretty well-known speakers and artists, films. Steve Cassano ran through that Cultural Program Committee a great speaker series. We had people like John Glenn and Dick Gregory, and we did concerts like Richie Havens. So there were some pretty exciting things going on. Bob Manning with the art gallery and all the art shows that they were working on every year, and the student art show at the end of the year still is a great program. So those are the things that's the first thing that really hit me, that we were doing some great things here. I think then when I got into the admissions office, I felt that we were doing our best to really recruit more and more students, and so we saw some enrollment growth, and we got out into the community, and that was, to me, that was the exciting part of the job, getting out into the community. And then lastly, I think working with Pat to put together the Sport and Exercise Studies degree program. We started with 4 or 5 students. This year we're going to have 147, 150 majors in that department.
Now, some people remember you as one of the motivating forces behind the Christmas video, working with John Murray.
Oh, right.
So you want to talk about some of the
Okay.
Christmas videos?
Okay. John and I got together one time, and we thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice to do something that would, if we had an annual party around Christmas time, faculty and staff, why don't we provide some entertainment? And that's kind of how it started. So I think we started small the first year, but each year it seemed to grow. So, and I think if you look at some of those videos, the number of people who got involved also grew. So it became kind of a campus-wide event, I think.
You remember any video skits that were particularly outstanding?
Well, one of my favorites, I think, is the year, I'm going to forget the year, it was probably late 80s, when the big retirement program hit. There was a retirement package offered, and we probably lost 30 to 40 people. And so we did a skit that was kind of a telethon, counting how many people were retiring. We had a phone bank set up, and people would call in to say, yes, I'm retiring. I think by the end of the program, all we were left with was the president and 3 deans to run the whole place, if I remember right. That one sticks out in my mind. Because it's connected to a real event that was happening, because we did lose a lot of people that year.
Now, more recently, you've been involved in the community garden, creating it, essentially. Can you talk a little about that?
Community gardens and farmers market. I think this really grew out of my own research that I did in terms of teaching my wellness class, where I try to bring a lot of issues of not just fitness, but nutrition and health into the wellness class. And in doing that, I found that this idea of eating whole foods, eating locally grown foods was part of that whole area of promoting good health and wellness. And so we started with the farmers market. I got involved with the sustainability committee and presented a proposal to them to start a farmers market. So we started with that, and then it seemed natural to think about having some community gardens on campus so we could actually be growing our own food. Even, just as an example, not that we're going to provide food for the whole cafeteria service, but as an example. And then we've branched out from there even, and now we're working with Bennett Academy, and we have something called the Edible Schoolyard. So the town of Manchester is supporting it, and they have a vegetable garden there, and those vegetables will be brought into the school cafeteria. And the town and the rec department are so interested that they now have proposed a garden at every elementary school in town in the next 3 years. So it's growing.
You've lived in the community, obviously.
Yeah.
For decades.
Right.
Been associated with the college.
Right.
How has the image of MCC changed in the community?
Yeah, I think the big change, and I remember this from when I was in the admissions office, the big change is that we're the first choice of a lot of students now. If you go back to the 80s, we were maybe the second or third choice, but we weren't enough of the first choice of students. Now people look at us differently. I hear it all the time when the admissions office sponsors an open house and we have a table there, and you can hear parents come in with their kids and say, wow, this is a real college. Because there's still a little bit of that image out there that community colleges are not quite the same as a 4-year school. So I think that's the big barrier that's been broken down. And then the other thing is the 4-year schools are now, there's no question about accepting credits anymore. You go back to the 70s and 80s, they were still raising questions about our credits.
If you were talking to someone who had just gotten hired to start his or her career at MCC next month, what would you advise that person?
Wow. Depends on where they're working and what job they have, but I think in terms of faculty, I would say to get involved with, make sure they get involved with the academic senate and get involved with committee work and don't stay apart from the campus if there's a lot going on. And with staff, I know it's harder because they have a lot more pressures on them in terms of office hours, but still, again, I think getting involved in the campus is a way, through governance, is a way to get connected to people. I think the strongest thing I always felt about Manchester was the kind of atmosphere of teamwork that we had here. that people always worked together. We weren't at odds, we weren't fighting, we were working together to achieve some kind of a goal together. And I think that is a strong point.
Is there anything else you want to add to kind of round out or wind up this
well,
presentation?
I think the one overriding point for me is the people I've worked with here over, it's going to be 40 years next year. That even though the campus didn't look great when I first got here, the people, that's what attracted me. And the number of different, I can only call them characters, that have been here and added to the richness of this campus has been phenomenal to me. So I never thought about looking for another job. I mean, this was the place I knew I was going to stay, in a sense, because the people were so strong here. And there are some characters. The other thing I think is that it always impressed me that no matter what our campus looked like, we were recognized as the top community college in the state. And this idea that we were the leaders in a lot of areas, in new program development, for instance. So, to me, that always was the kind of key that kept me involved in what's going on here, because the people that we work with are so terrific, and we were just, there was nowhere to go except continually go up. This is the way I looked at the college in general.
You use the term characters.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about any particular characters?
Let's see, characters. Ooh, I want to be nice about this. Well, we could start with Steve Cassano, who's one of the characters. And I'm using this word character in a good way, though. One of the characters on campus, who for years ran the voluntary action program and had students out in the community, who later ran for office and became mayor of Manchester after he retired, and brought a lot to, at that time, the faculty senate in terms of input. Mary Ann Hanley the same way. Lois Daigle, who was chair of the faculty senate for years, was, to me, a great character. I mean, she ran those meetings. It was phenomenal. It was entertaining to just be at the meeting, just to see how Lois handled it. Bob Mannion in the art gallery, and some of the struggles he had with hanging artwork around the campus when people may not have wanted a certain piece of art in their area. Eric Gordon, who showed up at graduation dressed in less than academic attire, let's put it that way. Who else? No, I think I'm going to stop there.
Let me ask you something that was discussed by Howie Bergman.
Yeah.
He said when he came here that there used to be fraternity houses on Bolton Lake.
Yes.
As director of student activities, do you recall that?
Unfortunately, as I got here, they were just being closed. So, but I do remember some of the stories about them, and yeah, there were a couple, 2 or 3, I think, at Bolton Lake, which was kind of odd to me for a community college, but because usually that's a residential kind of thing. But yeah, I do remember them being there. Yeah. I do remember taking, just to give you an example of the kinds of things that we did, I do remember taking a group of students to Hawaii for a student trip.
For vacation?
For for a vacation. We just planned a vacation trip, a travel program. And then Bill Levy, another character, by the way, Bill Levy took over the travel program and ran trips everywhere, including Cuba. He was one of the few, I think he had one of the 5 or 10 licenses in the United States to actually take students to Cuba. And he went all over. They went to China, a couple of European trips. And let's see, Bill Levy, Sebastian Mudry, another one of the characters of the place. And he just, in the psychology department and what he accomplished there and what he did with his Self and Others course was his favorite course. So the fraternity houses were there. I didn't quite see them in action, but I knew they were there, yeah.
Anything else that comes to mind?
Let's see. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's probably, unless John has something to help me out with. You want to remind me of something? All right.
I think that's it.
Okay.
That's very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
So will you ever retire?